got murder on my mind. AK-47s, Mac 11s, Glocks and 9.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, True Crime Tuesdays, where we delve into the horrors of today's society. You're probably wondering who's the person of interest in today's case. Well, it's none other than the Milwaukee cannibal himself, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Murderous orgy is over. Throughout the trial that found him sane, grief-stricken families of the 15 men and boys Dahmer killed and mutilated held their peace. But today, before the sentencing, they had their day in court.
Usual disclaimers. I don't own any music or clips I use in this video. All my information is what authorities have released, and I am going to put a trigger warning on this video, but I do like to keep this channel as non-triggering as possible. So as much as I'm going to cover today's case, I'll also keep anything that may trigger anyone to a minimum. But there is mentions of assault and violent methods of murder such as decapitation and cannibalism. Also, YouTube analytics have shown that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed, so if you do end up enjoying today's video or any of my other videos, please do consider subscribing. It's free and it helps me out a lot. So with that out of the way, on with today's case. So just the usual backstory that my viewers will probably know is coming by now. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Dahmer. There isn't too much information until his teen years, just that he's pretty much had a normal childhood, but as he got older he began to become withdrawn and uncommunicative. Hobbies and any form of social activity began to not become an interest to Jeffrey, except tennis, in which he was very keen to play. Instead of doing things that most normal teenagers would do, like going out with friends or going to, the park or something, he had a habit of examining animal carcasses, and he also drank heavily for his own entertainment. This drinking problem, however, didn't stop him from graduating in 1978, with just 3 weeks later committed his first murder at age 18. If you don't know how the schooling works in America, you're in high school from ages 14 or 18. And if you're in America and don't know how the UK schooling system works, you're in secondary from age 11 to age 16, and then college from 16 or 18. Jeffrey was alone in the house that day as his parents were going through a divorce, and he took the opportunity to murder his first victim, a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. He had offered to take him back to the house for beers, which they did, and as soon as Stephen decided he wanted to leave, Dahmer hit him in the back of the head with a 10-pound dumbbell. After this, he dissected, dissolved and pulverized Hicks' body and scattered the remains throughout the back garden. At this point, Stephen Hicks was unrecognizable, and the only way authorities could identify him and found out Dahmer killed him was a confession. After this, a whole 9 years would pass before Dahmer decided he would kill again. In his 9-year break, Dahmer would attend college but drop out due to his alcohol problem. His father then convinced him to join the army not too long later, and he served as a combat medic in Germany between 1979 and 1981, but was discharged and he moved back home. When his drinking caused more and more problems, he was sent to live with his grandmother in West Illes, Wisconsin. By 1985, he was frequently going to gay bathhouses where he would drug men and do unspeakable acts to them while they were unconscious. In 1982 and 1986, he was arrested twice for indecent exposure, but only got probation. His second victim was killed in September of 1987. His name was Stephen Tuomi. Dahmer was said to have picked him up from a bar, taken him back to a hotel room. He woke up next to the dead body the next morning. This lack of memory can be blamed on the alcohol because it was a bar that they came from that night. Dahmer stated to the police after he was arrested that he couldn't remember killing Tuomi, and it was all the fault of a blacked out impulse. He placed the body in a suitcase and took it to his grandmother's basement. Then a week later he dismembered it and placed everything in the bin other than the victim's head. He waited another week before doing anything else with Tuomi's head. But when he did, he boiled it in industrial detergent and bleach and pulverised the brittle skull. Soon after, Dahmer brought 14-year-old James Doxatar to his grandmother's basement, promising $50 or £40 to pose for nude photos. After drugging him, Dahmer strangled the young boy and disposed of the body in a similar way to Tuomi. His next victim was Richard Guerrero, who he met outside of a gay bar. Like James Doxatar, he offered Guerrero $50 to spend the night with him. Also like Doxatar, he drugged and strangled Guerrero. Unlike the rest of his killings up until this point, Dahmer decided he wanted to try something new: necrophilia. I'll put a definition on the screen, but there will be like sort of a trigger warning. But then he dismembered the body within the next 24 hours, but hiding the evidence was coming increasingly harder as he was running out of space. By this point, Dahmer's grandmother had become annoyed with her grandson bringing men to her house at night. That, added with the foul smell coming from the basement, was enough for her to tell him to move out. A few days after getting his own apartment, Dahmer was arrested for second-degree assault and enticing a child for immoral reasons. This came about after he lured 13-year-old Kason Synthesophone back to his apartment. After he led the young boy to his apartment, he drugged and then molested him before the boy escaped and went straight to the police. Dahmer was in jail for a week before getting out on bail. In March 1989, aspiring model Anthony Sears was next. The two met at a bar and Dahmer again brought his victim to his grandmother's house, out of fear that he was being watched by police because of his probation. He then drugged and strangled him. Dahmer then began to collect trophies from his victims. From Sears, he collected his head and his genitals, which he kept in a wooden box, and for some time he stored the box in his work locker. In May of that same year, he was sentenced to 12 months jail time and got 5 years probation for assault. He was permitted work release, and in order to keep his job at Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, he had to register as a sex offender. He got parole from jail after 10 months and rented an apartment at 924 North 25th Street in Milwaukee. In May 1990, 2 months after his release from his 10-month sentence, Dahmer killed 32-year-old Raymond Smith, who at the time was working as a prostitute. Dahmer offered him $50 for sex, which he agreed to. He then took him to his rented apartment and drugged him, and then, like the others, he strangled him. It was this point he decided he wanted to do something new. He took Polaroid photos of the dead body of Raymond Smith. He dismembered the body in the bathroom of the apartment, boiled what was left of Smith, and dissolved everything except his skull, which he kept with Sears' own skull. Neighbours began complaining about the smell from the apartment, and Dahmer simply told them that the fridge was broken, and he was waiting for it to be fixed. In June of 1990, after killing Raymond Smith, he attempted to preserve the body in his freezer, but it was eventually gotten rid of. In September of 1990, Dahmer switched up his killer method for a one-time murder, and instead of drugging and strangulation, he tried a different approach. The only victim to his new killing method was 22-year-old Ernest Miller. Dahmer had slashed his throat when they got to his apartment. Apparently the lack of sleeping pills he was using made Dahmer switch up his killing technique, and he kept parts of Miller's body to eat, and then painted and displayed Miller's head in the apartment. This, I'm pretty sure, is the first act of cannibalism that Jeffrey Dahmer, acts upon. In February 1991, Dahmer's 10th victim was 17-year-old Curtis Straughter. He had picked him up from a bus stop and promised money for nudes. He drugged and then strangled Straughter, took photos, and then dismembered the body. Some of the body parts were used for cannibalism and some for trophies, but he'd gotten rid of the rest that he didn't want. In April 1991, Dahmer took 19-year-old Errol Lindsay to his apartment and drugged him. He then, again, switched up his killing method, but this wasn't a one-time thing. He'd do this a few more times after this. He drilled a hole in Lindsay's skull and poured in hydrochloric acid. Dahmer later said to authorities that he hoped it would produce a zombie-like state. Lindsay regained consciousness, but Dahmer drugged him again, strangled him, and flayed the corpse, trying to keep his skin. In May 1991, Dahmer used the same drug strangulation method on 31-year-old Anthony Hughes. Hughes was still intact on the floor when Dahmer lured 14-year-old Konorak Synthesymphone to the apartment. He took photos, drugged him, and again drilled a hole in the victim's head, trying to make him brain dead. He drilled the hole, inserted the acid, and left his still alive body next to Hughes's corpse for a few hours while he went out. Dahmer returned in the early hours of that morning to see the 14-year-old outside the apartment complex with 3 women around him. He was groggy, but he had told them some of the story. Dahmer had tried to tell the women that the young boy was a friend and attempted to lead the boy back inside, but the women had already called the police by that point. When the police arrived, Dahmer had convinced them that the 14-year-old was his 19-year-old boyfriend, and they had argued after he drank too much. Even though the women there were still protesting, the officers took Dahmer and Synthesymphone back to the apartment. Dahmer brought the Polaroids he took to prove their relationship. The police on scene just categorised the event as a domestic dispute and left, but they did notice a strange smell coming from the apartment. Just like before, Dahmer drilled a hole in the 14-year-old's head and injected him again with acid. This time it was lethal and he died. He was actually the younger brother of another victim, Kaysen, who had escaped in 1998, and according to Dahmer, he had no idea about their relationship. Dahmer dismembered both bodies of the 14-year-old and Hughes and kept both of their skulls. In June 1991, Dahmer met 20-year-old Matthew Turner in Chicago and managed to persuade him to come to Milwaukee for a photo shoot. He used his drug, strangle, dismember method again. He kept Turner's head and internal organs in a freezer. Between July 7th and July 19th, 1991, 3 more lives were taken. First was another person he met in Chicago, Jeremiah Winberger, aged 20. They had agreed to a weekend away in his apartment. Dahmer didn't commit the murder until the day after they arrived, when Winberger said he wanted to leave. Same method: drug, strangle, dismember. A few days later, on July 15th, 24-year-old Oliver Lacey went to Dahmer's apartment for a nude photo shoot. Lacey was then drugged and given chloroform to keep him alive but unconscious for a day. After the 1 day had passed, Dahmer then strangled and went to the body to commit another act of necrophilia. He then stored the head and the heart in the fridge and the skeleton in the freezer. 4 days after murdering Lacey, on the 19th of July, Dahmer was fired from his job and lured 25-year-old Joseph Breithoft to his apartment. He then strangled and left his body on the bed for 2 days before putting his head in a freezer and discarding the rest of the body. On July 22nd, 1991, 2 officers were flagged down by an agitated man with handcuffs on one wrist. This man turned out to be 32-year-old Tracy Edwards. He told officers a freak had put him in handcuffs and had spent most of the evening trying to escape where he was being held captive. Dahmer had met Edwards earlier that day and got him to go to the apartment. However, Edwards immediately noticed a smell in stacked boxes of hydrochloric acid not too far away from the entrance. Dahmer had only managed to put handcuffs on one wrist before he pulled a knife and pulled Edwards towards the bedroom, where Dahmer attempted to take nudes. Edwards waited till Dahmer had lost concentration on him and punched him in the face before running out the door and signalling the police car. The officers, with directions from Edwards, went to Dahmer's apartment and he invited them in and openly admitted it was him who put Edwards in handcuffs and the key was on his nightstand. One officer saw a partially open drawer full of Polaroids and when he saw the images, he recognised that they were bodies in different states of dismemberment. He returned to the living room and showed them to the other officer, and it was said that he told the other officer, "These are for real." Upon seeing the images, Dahmer attempted to make a run for it, but was quickly caught by police who called in for assistance. Authorities opened Dahmer's fridge to see the severed head of a black male on the bottom shelf. They then found 4 other severed heads in the kitchen, 2 human hearts in the fridge, 7 skulls in Dahmer's bedroom, and a full human torso in his freezer. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that there were preserved sexual organs, 2 whole skeletons, severed hands, and a further 3 torsos submerged in acid. Following his arrest, Dahmer was not at all subtle about murdering people and the cannibalism or anything else. Dahmer had said that eating his victims was a compulsion and a way of, quote, making me feel that they were a part of me. He was also asked if he was glad it was over, and Dahmer simply stated he wasn't. He liked that lifestyle and found it exciting and thrilling, according to FBI files. Authorities had also asked if it was possible for him to lead a normal life if he was ever released, and he replied that prison was the best place for him, because if he ever got out, he'd go right back to the same behaviour, including killing and cannibalism. Even before his trial, Dahmer had pleaded guilty on the 13th of January 1992, but his trial began on January 30th, 1992, for 15 counts of first-degree murder, and due to the fact that he'd already pleaded guilty, he was obviously found guilty of all 15 counts, and because of that he was literally never getting out of jail anyway, and probably would have been put on death row if he wasn't murdered by another inmate. But obviously he never got around to that because he died in jail after being beaten to death by Christopher Scarver in Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin on November 28th, 1994. Okay, I thought I'd include this because I'm mid-editing and I thought I'd research it. Jeffrey Dahmer was actually put on death row, and like murder in America is normally given a life sentence if it's 1, but if it's like multiple and you don't have a reason to have insanity or anything like that, it is a death penalty. So that is the case of Jeffrey Dahmer. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of True Crime Tuesdays. If you did, feel free to drop a like and a subscribe, just to let me know that you guys are actually enjoying my content. And as I usually say, if you have any opinions on this case or anything that I maybe missed out, feel free to drop a comment too, just to let me know. All my social medias will be in the description, such as my TikTok, my Instagram, all that, so feel free to drop them a follow too. And you know what, click the notification bell while you're down there if you want to, of course, so you never miss another upload. But until next time, this was True Crime Tuesdays.